This ain't just a channel, this is BBTV.
Nikki Sixx didn't just survive rock history, he collided with it. Before the recovery, the reflection, and the second act, he faced many challenges. There was chaos that nearly ended everything. Fame arrived fast, excess followed faster. This was a crucial point, and the line between creativity and self-destruction disappeared completely. This story isn't about shock value, it's about consequence for everyone involved. Because the most important part of Nikki's journey isn't what he did at his worst, it's what had to break before change was possible.
A boss be rising, BBTV's igniting, turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss be rising, sky ain't even the ceiling when she hits go live, everybody feels it.
The queen of the comeback. All right. Welcome in. This is our first Jukebox Journey of 2026. I'm excited because y'all, I've upped my game. Period. Full stop. And before we even get started, let me set the tone for today. Because this episode is doing something a little different. And I don't want anyone coming in with the wrong expectations and missing the point. Jukebox Journey is not a playlist show. It never was. It's not about lining up artists that sound good together or even stacking songs that fit the same vibe or doing polite little hops from one band to another because the algorithm likes familiarity. That's easy. But we ain't doing that here. It's comfortable. We still ain't doing it here. And honestly, that gets boring real fast. It does. If I wanted to do that, I'd just put Spotify on shuffle and call it a day. But no, we're not doing that either. This show is about connection, real connection, human connection, the kind that leaves fingerprints all over the music, whether people want to talk about it or not. And somewhere along the way, even I'll admit it, we drifted a little too far into surface level chains. Same era, same sound, same scene, but not enough why, not enough consequence, and definitely not enough teeth. So today is a course correction. Call it a resolution. The reason today works as a reset, though, is because the story we're telling does not allow for politeness. You can't sand this one down and still be honest. You can't skip the ugly parts and claim it insight. No. And you definitely can't talk about the music without talking about the cost, right? Everybody's always loving the music. Oh, that's why we're starting here. But no, it's not just about the music. These people were human, okay? They're human. They may be heroes. They may do extraordinary things, but let me tell you, they're human and they have lives too. Now, when you hear the name Nikki Sixx, my heart thumps, okay? I'm just going to put that out there. I love me some Nikki Sixx. Most people immediately think extremes, right? Either the myth, the chaos, the excess, the legend, or the redemption arc, the recovery, the reflection, the look how far he's come version. What gets lost in between those two narratives is the process, the long, uncomfortable stretch where things didn't make sense, where the damage was still fresh, and where survival was not guaranteed. Not at all. That middle is what we're dealing with today. Because if you jump straight from destruction to redemption, you turn growth into branding. And that's not what this is. Growth that matters is slow and uneven and inconvenient. It costs relationships, okay? It costs identity. And sometimes it costs the very thing that made you successful in the first place. That's the spine of this episode. Like it or love it, stay or go. Now, I want to say something clearly because I know how these conversations can go sideways if you don't frame them properly. This is not an episode that glamorizes addiction. It's not an episode that romanticizes chaos. And it's not an episode that pretends destructive behavior excuse is tired. And it doesn't hold up under scrutiny, does it? No. So we're talking about substance dependency, destructive cycles, and high risk behavior because those things shape the music, the band, and you know what? Very much the people involved. Not because they're entertaining, but because they were consequential. Ignoring that doesn't make the story cleaner, it makes it dishonest. And honesty is kind of the whole point here, right? One of the reasons Nikki Sixx is such a powerful figure for his format, or this format, is because his story gives us a clear through line that spans multiple bands, multiple identities, and multiple versions of himself. You can't separate the early success from the instability that followed it. You can't separate the creativity from the self-destruction. And you know what? You can't separate the survival from the accountability that came later. That's what this is about. Those things are linked whether people like it or not. And usually, no, they don't like it. They just don't. And can you blame them? I mean, honestly, because sometimes, people can be bad. But that's why today's Jukebox Journey is built differently, I guess. You're going to hear longer video segments. You're going to hear more structure context before I jump back in. And when I do talk, it's not going to be to fill air or recap what you just heard. It's going to be to tell you why it matters, where the myth, they fall apart, and what this story actually teaches us beyond the music itself. Guys, I love my music. I do. And this is where I excel. So we're going to get into this pretty deep. So this is intentional, okay? All of this is intentional. And we know who Nikki Sixx is, but does anybody really know who Nikki Sixx is? Because I'm done rushing stories that deserve patience, okay? Let's talk about why this matters beyond Nikki Sixx. Because if this was just a biography, we wouldn't be doing it here. The real tension in this story isn't fame versus obscurity. It's momentum versus sustainability. And that's a problem a lot of people run into, not just musicians. You do. Come on. When success comes fast, it rewards behavior before it checks structure. It celebrates, output before it asks whether the system can survive it. And once people are applauding, it becomes very hard to slow down long enough to notice what's breaking underneath. That's not a moral failure, okay? That's a human failure. It's not just musicians that have these problems, okay? But if you see somebody that you have always thought, man, I want to be that. Do you really? Think about it. Okay? Think about it. Do you really? Or do you want to be a better version of that? That's where I want to go. And honestly, I think that's where Nikki Sixx went. He found himself again and again and again and again, But eventually, reality does intervene. It always does. And when it does, the choices get narrower. You either change or you collapse. You don't always get to do both, right? That's where this journey really begins. And I also want to be honest about something else, because this show is as much about how we tell stories as it is about the stories themselves. I'm pacing myself differently right now. I'm structuring my talking time differently, and that's not accidental. It's not a lack of commitment. It's the opposite. I want to be able to do this work long term. I love doing it. I want these conversations to stay sharp, thoughtful, and grounded instead of strained and rushed. So tonight, you're going to see me step in, step out, let the story breathe, and then come back when there's something worth adding. Now, that's not absence to me. That's discipline. Okay. Because we all know I'm having a little issue with my voice and everything. And honestly, it fits the story better anyway, because Nikki Sixx's story is not one long monologue. It's a series of collisions and consequences and recalibrations. It has breaks in it. It has pauses in it. It has moments where everything stops working and has to be rebuilt from the ground up. Hi, Jaden. Thank you for joining the group. Hello to anybody that's coming in. Star Gorilla, very good to see you. Speeds Bros, happy to have you. You are chill. I'm so glad because we are chill here. Hello, boss man. Good to see you. Pardon me for not getting to that sooner, but y'all, if you don't know this already, I love me some Nikki Sixx. I think I already said that once. Okay. Anyway, and let me tell you something. It's because I think he has a lot to show a lot of people because of the different things that he has gone through and come out of. I mean, the man's breathing today, and that's saying a lot. We know how the rock world goes, right? But anyway, back to this. Yes, welcome to the universe. Thank you so much. So, I guess back to the structure. If it feels different, that's because the story demanded it. Now, before we roll into the first segment video, I want to say this to everyone watching who has ever had to step away from something they loved, a career, a relationship, a version of themselves, not because it failed, but because it was costing them too much. This episode is not about idolizing, Nikki Sixx. It's about recognizing a pattern that shows up everywhere once you know how to see it, right? So the moment where continuing the way you are means losing yourself entirely, the moment where stopping feels like failure, but continuing feels worse, that very moment where you realize that survival requires change, not just endurance. That's the connective tissue here. And it's always going to be. I think it's great. So we're going to talk a little bit about Mötley Crüe, a little. We're going to talk about 6 a.m. We're going to talk about chaos and control and ego and damage, recovery and growth. But we're not doing it to rank bands or crown heroes. We're doing it to tell the truth about what it costs to outgrow the myth that made you famous. It's a thing. All right, let's start where the story actually starts. Not with the comeback, not with the cleanup, not with the rebrand, but the conditions that made collapse inevitable and change unavoidable. Because without that, none of what comes later, it really doesn't make any sense. Y'all watch this. Actually, I think what we're going to do first is I have a little letter, and I almost completely forgot about that. We're going to start that first.
Dear B. All right, I'm going to say this the way I should have said it a long time ago. I grew up watching Nikki, not up close. But through the version of you the world sold us, the loud one, the dangerous one, the one we were told was rock and roll. And I believed it. Hell, most of us did. We thought the chaos was the whole point. We thought the damage was proof of authenticity. Back then, the questions we asked were stupid. It was a learning curve for everyone involved. How does he live like this? How far can he push it? How long before it all blows up? What we were really asking was how much a person could destroy and still be admired and praised by everyone. Here's the question I didn't know how to ask until I got older. Was any of it ever control? Or was it just noise loud enough to hide what was breaking underneath? It's truly something to consider, isn't it now? Because from the outside, it looked like power. But looking back now, it looks a lot more like armor. Like survival dressed up as confidence. And we cheered it on because the myth needed feeding. It was a fascinating study in human psychology. We used to say the music wouldn't survive without excess. That if the chaos stopped, the creativity would too. I really believe that. Turns out, that belief says more about us than it ever did about you. That's another question we never asked. What does it cost to be the guy everyone points to and says, "That's rock and roll," while quietly expecting you not to make it out alive? Back then, we called it a lifestyle. Now I call it a trap, watching you survive and then change completely. It forced a lot of us to sit with something uncomfortable, because survival alone wasn't the story we were expecting to hear, and it really shifted our perspective. Accountability was. And accountability doesn't make for flashy headlines. Some people wanted the old version back. Some wanted redemption without reckoning. Some wanted to pretend the wreckage didn't matter as long as the songs kept coming. But growth doesn't work like that. So here's the question that actually matters, the really important one to ask. What does it look like to grow up without rewriting your history? From where I'm standing, it looks a little bit quieter. It looks like boundaries. It looks like choosing coherence over chaos, like using the microphone differently and exploring new sounds. Not to amplify destruction, but to name it honestly. I am not writing this as a fan looking for a hero, and I'm not writing it as a critic pretending I was above it all. I'm writing it as someone who needed time to realize we were asking the wrong questions. We were asking how wild you could be. We should have been asking how human. And the fact that we are still getting answers. Without spectacle, without denial, this might be the most honest part of the whole story. It truly captures the essence of what happened, raw and unfiltered.
Thank you, Big Jack. I'm so glad you're here. Oh my goodness. It was the picture of me that just, it kind of flipped me out there a little bit. Thank you, Big Jack. Duh. All right. So get back to that picture there. Yes, that's me. I was about 16. Nikki Sixx on the wall behind me. Shades of John Lennon. You know what? I'll take it. I'll take it. I love these shades. They're my favorite. My husband wears a blue pair. Okay, so before I get into this, I really want to frame it properly because how you enter the story matters just as much as what you hear. This video is split intentionally into two halves, and that's not a creative choice. It's an honest one. The first half sits in the past, not the myth, not the punchlines, the reality. It looks at the environment that shaped Nikki Sixx early on, the speed, the pressure, the normalization of excess, and the way chaos slowly stopped being an edge and started becoming the baseline. This isn't about shock value, okay? It's about understanding how patterns form when success arrives faster than boundaries can keep up. That part of the story is uncomfortable for some people. because it forces us to acknowledge something we don't like admitting, that a lot of what we call rock culture rewarded behavior long after it started doing damage. Not just one person, but to bands of people, relationships, and trust itself. So if the first half feels a little heavy, that's because it should. It's meant to show what happens when momentum outruns sustainability. But the video doesn't stay there. Okay. The second half will shift a bit, not into erasure and not into a clean rewrite, but into reckoning. Hi, Lucy Warren. Good to see you, hun. Thank you for being here. So, into what happens when survival forces honesty, when denial stops working, when the story can't keep going unless something fundamentally changes. Thank you for being here, Lucy. I appreciate it a great deal. So, this isn't a redemption arc in the glossy sense. There's no pretending the damage didn't happen. There's no claim that growth cancels out the past. What you're going to hear instead is accountability, the quieter, harder kind. Now, this is also the kind that shows up in consistency and restraint and choosing to live differently, even when the old chaos would have been easier to tell or even to sell. And that's why I wanted this piece to run uninterrupted, because this is one of those moments where commentary gets in the way. The contrast matters more than my opinion. The shift matters more than explanation. And sometimes the most respectful thing you can do with a story like this is let it speak long enough for the difference to register on its own. So watch the first half for what it explains. Watch the second half for what it proves. He had a lot to prove, and he did. And remember, the most important part of this journey isn't that someone survived. It's that they changed without pretending the past didn't count. That's so important. You may not want to live in the past, but you can't forget it because it shapes you. All right. So let's roll this first half.
Before stardom, who Nikki Sixx was before the world watched. Before anybody ever screamed his name from a crowd, before the eyeliner and the headlines and the mythology hardened into something people now call rock history, Nikki Sixx was already carrying a kind of hunger that doesn't come from wanting fame. It comes from wanting to matter, from wanting to be impossible to ignore. And that distinction, it really matters, because people who want fame will perform for it, but people who want to matter will burn things down if they think it's the only way to be seen. Now that edge was there early, long before anyone slapped a logo on it or called it a brand. Nikki didn't grow into that intensity because of success. Success poured gasoline on something that was already smoldering. And when people talk about the early days, they love to make it sound scrappy and romantic, like everybody was just chasing a dream together. But the truth is, that early grind is where ego and insecurity move in together and start rearranging the furniture. So Mötley Crüe didn't come together because four perfectly aligned souls found each other at the exact right moment. It came together because personalities collided. Strong ones, volatile ones. You had Vince Neil, Mick Mars, and Tommy Lee all bringing something essential, all bringing their own damage, and all operating without the guardrails that maturity usually installs later in life. And in the middle of that, Nikki wasn't just another guy in the room. He was already trying to steer the thing. That's where the petty starts. Not the fun kind, the real kind. Who's in charge? Whose idea gets priority? Who gets credit? Who's replaceable and who isn't? And when nobody's famous yet, every disagreement feels existential. You're not just arguing about music, you're arguing about survival, about identity, about whether you're going to be the one left standing when this either explodes or takes off. Nikki had vision, and vision is dangerous when it's paired with fear, because vision wants control, it wants structure, it wants direction. And when you're surrounded by other big personalities who aren't interested in being directed, that turns into friction fast. Early Nikki was driven, creative, and relentless, and also not always easy, not always kind, and not always self-aware enough to see where the line between leadership and control was getting crossed. And here's where the story usually gets cleaned up for comfort. So we're not doing that. Substances didn't suddenly appear once the fame arrived. They were already a part of the environment, already blurring boundaries, already amplifying whatever tendencies were present instead of tempering them. That wasn't glamorous excess yet. That was coping. This was self-medication mixed with ambition and adrenaline, a combination that doesn't end well when nobody involved knows how to slow down. The band's early identity fed that volatility. Shock wasn't accidental, it was intentional. Provocation was currency, and Nikki, he understood that instinctively. He knew how to make noise, how to command attention, how to build an image that couldn't be ignored. But when you build your sense of worth around being indispensable, you also make yourself impossible to replace and impossible to reason with. So that's where things start to get messy. Creative disagreements turn personal. Jokes turn into power plays. Loyalty becomes conditional, and nobody pauses long enough to ask whether the energy fueling the band is sustainable, because at that stage, sustainability feels like a luxury you can't afford. You're too busy trying to make it out of obscurity alive, right? This is also where the myth starts lying to us. We are told that the chaos is what made the band, that dysfunction equals authenticity, that if it was messy, it must have been magic. But the truth is, chaos did not create Mötley Crüe. It threatened to tear it apart before it ever really stood a chance. The chemistry, it wasn't born from destruction. It survived in spite of it. And yeah, I'm going to say the thing out loud, because dancing around it is boring. Early Nikki Sixx was a hot mess, a talented one, a magnetic one, a walking warning label. Would I have kicked him out of my bed? Absolutely not. Would I have trusted him with my emotional stability, my finances, or my long-term well-being? Hell no. And both of those things can be true at the same time. That's not shade, that's honesty. He was the kind of person you'd follow into a room without checking for exits. Exciting, dangerous, compelling, and already showing signs that boundaries were going to be a problem long before success magnified everything. That's the version of Nikki people love to mythologize later, okay? But without acknowledging how close that energy came to imploding the whole operation. What matters here is that none of this started with fame. The patterns were already in place. Control issues, identity tied too tightly to output, a deep fear of being irrelevant or replaceable, a need to be central, and a need to matter. All of that existed before the world ever showed up to applaud it. So when Mötley Crüe finally broke through, they weren't stepping into success with clean hands and stable footing. They were carrying unresolved tension, unchecked habits, and personalities that had never been forced to slow down or even self-correct. Fame didn't introduce those problems. It rewarded them. It normalized them. It made them profitable. And that's why this story has to start here. Because if you want to understand the collapse, the reckoning, and the eventual growth, you have to understand the person before the pressure. You have to see the hunger before it was fed, the insecurity before it was validated, the chaos before it was celebrated. Nikki Sixx didn't become complicated because of success. Success made it impossible to ignore how complicated he already was. And that's where this journey actually begins. Not with the spotlight, not with the excess, but with a young man who needed to matter so badly that he was willing to let everything else burn if that's what it took. Stardom, escalation, and when chaos stops being cute. When the fame finally hit, it didn't arrive gently. It never does. It came fast and loud and validating in the most dangerous way possible. It told everyone involved that whatever they were doing was working. And that's the moment when bad habits stop looking like warning signs and start looking like personality traits. So for Nikki Sixx, success didn't calm anything down. It amplified everything that was already there. The hunger didn't disappear once the rooms filled up. It mutated. It turned into pressure to maintain control, to stay essential, to keep the machine moving no matter what it cost. Because once people start watching, slowing down feels like, well, unaliving. And the band dynamic, it didn't magically mature just because money showed up. Mötley Crüe became bigger and louder and more powerful, but internally, the same petty issues followed them into larger rooms. Creative control fights did not go away. They got more expensive. Ego clashes didn't soften. They got more public. And, well, the substance use or abuse, which had already been blurring boundaries early on, now had the money, the access, and cultural permission to run unchecked. This is where the myth really tightens its grip. Because from the outside, this is the part people still cheer for. The excess, the headlines. The can you believe they survived that stories. But living inside that environment is not a party, it's a pressure cooker. And Nikki, being both a creative engine and someone deeply tangled in destructive cycles, was right at the center of it. The band didn't just tolerate the chaos. At times, it depended on it. Shock sold. Extremes sold. The brand rewarded instability. And when an entire system benefits from someone not getting well, recovery stops being a personal decision and starts feeling like a betrayal. That's a heavy thing to carry, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. Sometimes people don't want you to get well because you're not the same. So inside the band, trust eroded in ways that weren't always loud. it showed up in controlled battles, in resentment, in people keeping score. Who showed up? Who didn't? Who could be relied on? Who couldn't? And Nikki's role became increasingly complicated. Part leader, part liability, part symbol of everything the band was becoming known for. This is the part where rock culture excuses get rolled out, where people shrug and say, that's just how it was back then. But that explanation, it doesn't hold up when you look closely. What really is happening was that accountability kept getting postponed, not denied, just delayed. And delay has consequences. Substance dependency didn't just affect Nikki's health. It affected decision-making, reliability, relationships. It made collaboration harder and trust thinner. And while everyone involved had their own issues, Nikki's position as a central figure meant that when things went wrong, the fallout was also magnified. This is also where fear starts doing real damage. Fear of being replaced or losing relevance. Fear of being seen clearly instead of mythologized. Those fears don't disappear with success. They sharpen. And when fear meets addiction, the result isn't rebellion, it's desperation. There's a moment in every destructive spiral where the chaos stops feeling thrilling and starts feeling necessary, where people aren't partying because they want to, but because stopping would force them to look at what's underneath. And by this point, Nikki was deep in that territory. The behavior wasn't about fun anymore. It was about avoidance. And the band paid for it. Schedules became unreliable. Tensions escalated. Communication broke down. The chemistry that once felt electric started feeling fragile. And instead of addressing the root problems, the machine kept pushing forward because there was too much at stake to pause. Too many people depending on the momentum. Too much money. Too much expectations. Too many eyes. This is where the story gets uncomfortable because there's no clean villain here. Nikki wasn't a monster. The band wasn't heartless. The industry wasn't uniquely evil. But the system they were all inside rewarded survival over health and output over stability. And Nikki, already struggling, became the most visible fracture point in that system. What gets lost in the highlight reels is how lonely this phase actually is. Because once someone becomes the embodiment of chaos, people stop seeing them as human and start seeing them as inevitable. Like this is just how they are or who they are. Like the ending has already been written. That's a dangerous place to be. And here's where I'll say something that doesn't get said enough. Surviving that environment without intervention is rare. The odds are not good. The fact that Nikki lived through this phase at all is not proof that it was sustainable. It's proof that the situation had reached a breaking point. By the time things truly started collapsing, the warning signs had been there for years. The difference was that now they were impossible to ignore. The behavior that once made headlines now threatened lives. The chaos that once sold tickets now risked ending the story altogether. This is the moment where hot mess stops being charming and starts being fatal. And it's important to sit with that because everything that comes next, the reckoning, the recovery, the second chapter, only matters if we're honest about how close this all came to ending very differently. The myth tells us this phase was legendary. The reality is, it was unsustainable. And Nikki Sixx didn't survive because the chaos worked. He survived because eventually it didn't. That's where the first half of this journey ends, not with triumph, not with redemption, but with the undeniable truth that something had to change, or there would be a story no longer left to tell.
She came from the quiet storms, built a fire from the ground, turned a whisper to a warning. Now her voice shakes the town. Every setback was a lesson, every doubt became a key, unlocking something bigger. That's the rise of Boss B. When the lights go low, her vision hits high. She built a whole damn network off a promise and a try. Every sunrise, every moment, she's stacking legacy. This ain't just a channel, this is BBTV. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel road to the neon dream, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. She's the queen of the comeback, the storm in the stream, crafting stories out of heartbeats, making visions out of dreams. Got thunder in the hustle, got a voice that cuts clean. Every mic she touches turns the power unseen. So let further spin the numbers, let the views rise slow or fast. Boss B doesn't measure wins by echoes of the past. This moment is a pivot, this season's history. Bow down to the founder of the BBTV dynasty. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dream, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. She's got fire in the head, it's got truth in the frame, got a heart that won't retire and a gift you can't name. Every loop, every letter, every dream she sets free, it's a love note to the world sign. Boss B. And the world keeps watching as the numbers climb, but she's counting all the moments, not the dollar signs. From the late night grind to the daylight scene, she's building something bigger than the algorithm's dream. Boss B rising, BBTV shining, her story's rewriting, a legacy in real time. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dream, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. BBTV, where the stories breathe. BBTV, where the dreamers believe. Boss B rising, watch her take her place. This is BBTV, this is her grace.
Join Boss B for Ask a Bee Monday through Friday, 12 noon Central Standard Time and Jukebox Journey every Saturday, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time.
Hitting the wall when survival replaces the myth. At some point, the chaos stops being optional. It stops being a choice. a persona, a coping mechanism you can pick up and put down depending on the night. It becomes the only way you know how to exist. And that's the moment when the myth finally cracks, because myths don't survive contact with reality. Bodies do, or they don't. For Nikki Sixx, that moment didn't arrive as a dramatic epiphany or a cinematic turning point. It arrived the way these things usually do, quietly, brutally, and without asking permission. The behaviors that had once felt survivable, suddenly they weren't. The safety nets people assumed were there turned out to be imaginary, and the version of himself he had been running on autopilot could no longer carry the weight. This is the part of the story people either rush through or romanticize, because sitting with it forces a confrontation nobody really wants. Because hitting the wall isn't glamorous, it's not inspiring, it's humiliating. It's the moment where denial collapses and the story you've been telling yourself no longer holds up. Up until then, survival, it had been accidental. A series of close calls, chalked up to luck, resilience, or some twisted sense of invincibility. But eventually, luck runs out. And when it does, you're left with the truth in its rawest form. This isn't sustainable, and pretending otherwise is no longer an option. What's hard to understand from the outside is that hitting the wall doesn't automatically create clarity. Sometimes it creates panic. Sometimes it even creates shame. And you know what? Most of the time it creates silence. Because when your entire identity has been wrapped around excess, control, and constant motion, stopping feels like erasure. You don't fear losing the lifestyle, you fear losing yourself. That's where the real reckoning lives. This is the point where accountability enters the room, and accountability is uncomfortable because it doesn't care how talented you are. It doesn't care what you've survived before. It doesn't negotiate. It just asks one question over and over again. Are you willing to live differently or not? And that question doesn't come with applause. For Nikki, the confrontation wasn't just with mortality. It was with impact, with the realization that survival wasn't just about staying alive, but about acknowledging the wreckage left behind. Relationships strained or broken, trust eroded. People who had been forced into roles they never agreed to play. That's a heavy inventory to take, especially when you've spent years being rewarded for not slowing down long enough to notice it. This is also where the story stops being about substances alone and starts being about control. Because dependency isn't just chemical, it's psychological and it's emotional. It's tied to fear, to identity, to the belief that without the chaos, there's nothing left worth showing the world. And dismantling that belief requires something harder than willpower. It requires honesty. Honesty about the damage and the cost, about the fact that survival alone isn't growth. That's not a one-time realization, it's a grind, a series of small, unglamorous choices made without certainty that they'll pay off. Choosing restraint over indulgence, choosing consistency over intensity, choosing accountability over ego. None of that feels powerful in the moment. It feels limiting. It feels like loss. But it's also the first time real agency shows up. What's rarely talked about is how lonely this phase is, because the people who loved the myth don't always love the dismantling of it. Some fans want the chaos back. Some peers feel threatened by change. Some relationships can't survive the shift. Growth has a way of thinning the room, and that can feel like punishment when you're already stripped raw. And yet, this is where the story turns. Not because everything suddenly gets better, but because the direction changed. The energy that once went into destruction has to be redirected somewhere, or it eats you alive. That redirection doesn't erase the past, it forces it into a new shape. This is where reflection replaces reaction, where speaking honestly becomes more important than performing outrage, where the goals shift from being untouchable to being sustainable. That's not a popular transformation, but it's a meaningful one. For Nikki, this phase marked the end of accidental survival and the beginning of intentional living. And intentional living is slower, quieter. It doesn't generate headlines the same way chaos does, but it does something more important. It creates the possibility of a future that isn't built on denial. That's the difference between escaping consequences and learning from them. And here's the thing that matters most in this segment. Nothing about this phase rewrites what came before. Accountability doesn't work that way. Growth doesn't cancel damage. What it does is refuse to pretend the damage didn't happen. It integrates it. It carries it forward as an information instead of spectacle. It's a lesson. This is the moment where the story could have ended. Plenty of stories like this do. The fact that this one didn't isn't because the chaos was sustainable. It's because the person at the center of it finally stopped confusing endurance with strength. That's the pivot. And it sets the stage for what comes next. Not redemption as performance, not recovery as branding, but a different way of showing up that had to be earned the hard way. Because once you hit the wall and survive it, you don't get to pretend you didn't see it. And that changes everything. After the wall, growth with receipts, not a rewrite. What comes after the wall is the part people misunderstand the most. Because they want it to be clean. They want a straight line from destruction to redemption, from chaos to wisdom, from that guy to this guy. But real growth doesn't move in straight lines. It doubles back. It stutters. It forces you to sit with things you can't undo and decide how you're going to live anyway. For Nikki, the shift that followed wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself with fireworks. It showed up in choices that didn't make headlines at first. Slower decisions, different priorities, a willingness to be accountable without demanding applause for it. That's not the version of change people like to celebrate because it doesn't flatter the myth, but it's the kind that lasts. This is where people start asking the wrong questions again. They ask whether he found himself, whether he turned it all around, whether the story now has a happy ending. But those questions miss the point. The real change here wasn't about becoming a different person. It was about becoming a more honest one, about letting go of the idea that intensity equals truth and learning that restraint can be just as powerful. So one of the most important receipts of that growth is 6 a.m. And this isn't about comparing bands or ranking eras. This is about intent. 6 a.m. didn't exist to recreate the chaos that made Nikki famous. It existed to process it, to tell stories that couldn't be told honestly in the old framework. The music wasn't trying to shock anyone. It was trying to make sense of things that had already happened. That's a fundamental shift. When someone uses creativity to interrogate their past instead of escape it, you can hear the difference. The urgency changes, the aggression softens into clarity, and the need to dominate gives way to the need to communicate. That doesn't make the work weaker, it makes it more precise. And here's where I want to slow this down, because this part matters. Growth isn't proven by saying the right things. It's proven by consistency over time, by choosing not to benefit from the same systems that once rewarded destruction, by speaking openly about recovery without turning it into a brand or a shield, by acknowledging harm without insisting on forgiveness as payment. That's a harder road than people think. Because when you stop performing chaos, you lose a certain kind of attention. You lose the easy headlines. You lose the caricature people felt comfortable with. And what you're left with is yourself, without the noise to hide behind. That's not glamorous, but it's brave. Another receipt is how influence gets used differently. There's a difference between telling stories about survival and using your platform to normalize responsibility, between reminiscing and advocating, between glorifying the past and contextualizing it so fewer people have to repeat it. That distinction is subtle, but it's real, and it's where maturity shows up. What I respect most about this space isn't perfection, because perfection isn't the goal. It's restraint. It's the refusal to rewrite history to make present more comfortable. It's the willingness to say, this happened, it mattered, it caused damage, and I'm still here, but I'm choosing differently. That's not redemption theater. That's accountability lived out loud. Now, this is also the part where some people get uncomfortable again, because they want growth to come with a clean slate. They want the past to be forgiven, forgotten, and filed away. But that's not how integrity works. Integrity doesn't erase the past. It integrates it. It carries it forward as information instead of spectacle. And that's why this story holds. Because Nikki didn't come back pretending to be harmless. He came back more aware, more contained, more intentional. He didn't ask the world to forget who he was. He asked it to see who he had become in relation to who he used to be. That's a crucial difference. This is also where the conversation circles back to power. Early on, power meant control, volume, presence at all cost. Later, power looks like choice. It looks like knowing when to step back, when to say no, and when to protect the work by protecting yourself. That's not weakness. That is command. And it's a lesson that extends far beyond one person or one band. Because how many stories do we celebrate where destruction is treated like a prerequisite for greatness? How many people do we applaud for surviving systems we refuse to change? And honestly, how often do we confuse endurance with strength and call it inspiration? This chapter challenges that narrative. It says what you don't have to burn everything down to matter. You don't have to be dangerous to be compelling, and you certainly don't have to destroy yourself to create something meaningful. That's a powerful message, especially coming from someone whose early career was built on the opposite belief. Now, I want to be clear about something else before we close this video out. None of this erases the earlier damage. It doesn't make the past worth it. Growth doesn't retroactively justify harm. What it does is refuse to add more harm to the pile. It draws a line and says, this stops here. And that's the quiet success of this story. Not that the music continued, not that the career survived, but that the person did with enough awareness to choose a different path without pretending the old one never existed. That's what makes this a real full circle moment. Not a return to where things started, but an arrival somewhere wider, somewhere that can hold both the brilliance and the wreckage without collapsing under either. Somewhere that allows the past to inform the present without owning it. And that's why this story belongs here. Because Jukebox Journey isn't about worshiping legends or tearing them down. It's about understanding how people change when the systems around them stop rewarding them their worst impulses and start demanding responsibility instead. Nikki Sixx's story doesn't end with redemption. It ends with coherence. Not that it's really ended. And in a culture that still loves chaos more than accountability, that might be the most radical move of all. Thank you, Nikki.
All right, all right. Welcome back. So it's my turn again. I just want to say hello to Kyle and Joy. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you so much. Okay, so I'm not going to pretend I'm neutral here because neutrality is overrated and usually dishonest anyway. First, I want to a little bit myself. To get this out of the way so nobody's touching inch later, okay? Yes, I see Nikki Sixx. I always have. I saw him back when I wasn't supposed to. I see him now that I'm old enough to know better. And if he were standing on a stage in front of me, right, because attraction doesn't disappear just because someone grew up. Go figure. If anything, it gets me more interested. And before anyone, pardon me, turns that into something it's not, calm down. I am me. He is way above my pay grade. Okay. Okay. I said, I see the man. There's a difference. Huge difference. What I loved about the letter and what and is that it finally lets grown folks talk honestly about what we were really watching back then. Because let's not rewrite history here. A lot of us weren't just listening to the music. We were watching men self-destruct in real time and calling it freedom. We were confusing danger with depth. We were mistaking lack of boundaries for authenticity. Bad, Gen X, bad. And yeah, we even cheered it on. So when the letter talks about the questions we asked back then, how far can he go? How does he live like that? How long before it all blows up? That hits, right? Because that's exactly what we were doing. We weren't asking those questions out of concern. We were asking them like bets, like spectators. If like the ending was entertainment instead of human being, okay? Y'all, that part, that's on us. Totally on us, Gen X. But here's where I'm going to get spicy because this is where I live. Okay? Prepare yourself, clutch your pearls, get a hold of them. The thing about Nikki Sixx and men like him is that the very traits that made them dangerous also made them magnetic. Intensity, drive, control, issues, wrapped up as confidence with little chemical help, right? That energy pulls people in. It always has. And pretending otherwise, it doesn't make you morally superior. Okay. It just makes you boring. Plain and simple. Let's be honest. Early Nikki was a complete and total hot mess. And I mean that in the most complete sense of the phrase. Brilliant, broken, compelling, unstoppable. The kind of man you'd absolutely follow into a bad decision and then spend years unpacking why you did it. I'm not judging that, okay? I'm naming it. Here's the thing grown women know that younger girls don't yet get. Attraction doesn't mean endorsement. Desire doesn't mean permission. You can want someone and still recognize that they are not safe for you or for themselves for that matter. And that moment in time is not the time. That's where the growth part matters. What I respect about Nikki now isn't that he survived. Survival is not a flex by itself. A lot of people survive while leaving absolute wreckage behind them. What I respect is that he didn't demand applause for changing. He didn't ask us to forget who he was. He didn't even clean up the story so it would sit better in interviews or tabloids, TV, whatever. None of that. He never did that. He let discomfort stay visible and he was okay with it. How can you be? But yeah. And that's hot in a way chaos never was. Sorry, I grew up too. Because confidence without self-awareness is just noise, people. With accountability, with scars you don't pretend are trophies, that's grown man energy to me. Now, let me say something here that might piss a few people off, and I'm okay with that. Women are allowed to admire men who did terrible things and acknowledge that they grew. Those two thoughts can exist in the same brain without canceling each other out. What we're not allowed to do, and what I refuse to do, is pretend the damage didn't happen just because the outcome turned out better than expected. Growth doesn't erase harm, it contextualizes it. And Nikki's later work, this advocacy, the way he speaks about recovery, the way he uses his voice now, that tells me this wasn't about image repair. This was about not wanting to go away the same man he had been surviving as. I think a lot of us can have a common ground with that too. No, we're not famous, but we can understand that, right? And, that's not sexy in a flashy way. That's sexy in an earned way. Go figure. 24-year-old me would have just thought sexy. That's it. Now it's, wow, he found himself again. And it's kind of hot. Yeah. I'll say it again. If I were standing on that stage right now, I'd flirt, because flirting is acknowledgement. It's saying, I see the whole arc, not just the highlight reel. Okay. It's not begging. It's not chasing. It's recognition between adults who understand the cost of becoming who they are. Here's the part where I can bring it home, though. This story isn't really about Nikki Sixx. It's about what happens when we stop asking men to destroy themselves for our entertainment and start respecting the ones who choose to live differently. It's about letting people evolve without forcing them to pretend the past didn't happen. It's about understanding that accountability, it doesn't make someone less interesting. It makes them more real. That's common sense, okay? And frankly, I'm tired of comforty. I'm tired of conformity too. I tried. I can't do it no more. I'm tired of acting like grown women don't feel attraction, curiosity, admiration, and complicated things all at once. I'm tired of pretending insight has to be polite to be valid. And I'm really tired of shrinking the conversation so no one gets uncomfortable. Discomfort is where the truth lies, people. Truth hurts, right? So, yeah, this is me, flawed, loud, insightful, a little wild, fully aware of my contradictions, and I can admire the man without worshiping the myth. I can respect the growth without excusing the damage. And I can flirt without surrendering my standards. I'm married. I do not look like something Nikki Sixx would ever be attracted to. And I'm aware of that. Okay. My whole point. And it's not chaos. That's clarity. Seriously. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, let me just say this. A very wise man that I used to know, God rest his soul, gave me a phrase that I'll carry with me forever. Sorry about your luck. Because the sane people, okay, I'm a little crazy. I know I am. I got it on paper. But let me tell you what, it's the sane people that scare me. And I think Nikki Sixx saw that too. I truly do. I mean, how could he not, right? How could he not? And I think I've said it for more than just, my Nikki Sixx years. I know I have. I know you've heard me say it before. I know my family has definitely heard me say it more than once. All right. So before I do anything else, I'm going to pull up a little promo VB. I don't know if you all know VB, but VB is VB and she's not spicy anymore. I put her in her place. So check it.
Enjoying this show, subscribing is the easiest way to support what's being built here on BBTV. You'll see the join button right next to subscribe. No pressure, no expectations, just an option for people who want to support the channel in a real way. We're live weekdays at 12 p.m. Central, and each day has its own focus. Same honesty, same voice, just different conversations depending on the day. And if you've got a story you want to share, send it in. Anonymous is always fine.
All right. Before we wrap this up, I just want to slow it down for a notch. Not to soften anything, okay? But to let it land where it's supposed to. Stories like this don't need fireworks at the end. They need honesty. And if you've been with me all the way through this episode, then you already know this wasn't about crowning a hero or tearing one down. You're definitely built different, okay? It was about tracing a full human arc, the kind we don't usually give people permission to have. Because, what we walked through today wasn't just a career. It was a pattern, a cycle, a warning that, a possibility living in the same body. Okay. And yeah, it was about Nikki Sixx, but it was also about what happens when a culture rewards destruction louder than it rewards growth. About what happens when people confuse intensity. Oh, thank you. Hey, Survivor. There you are, doll. Good to see you. So, what I hope you take from this isn't really admiration or judgment. I want it to be perspective, because the real takeaway here, good to meet you. from India. My goodness, all the way from India watching me. I feel so blessed. Thank you. Thank you. Very proud. Thank you. I love your videos, by the way. They are just absolutely beautiful. And anybody that has needs to know, you know what? I'm going to do this real quick. Y'all go see Survivor Nikita, please. Beautiful, beautiful videos. I mean, amazing. I think I've binge watched 2 or 3 times this week. So you got this, honey. You got this. I'm very proud of you. Very proud to know you, honey. All righty. So, the real takeaway here isn't that someone fell hard, okay, and climbed back up. It's that the climb didn't erase the fall, and it didn't need to. The value was in the reckoning, okay, the choice to live differently without pretending the old version never existed. That kind of growth doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be believed. It just shows up consistently. And let's do the talking, okay? That's something a lot of us recognize in our own lives. Even if the scale looks different, it's true. We all have versions of ourselves that got rewarded for behavior we eventually had to outgrow. We all have moments where stopping felt like failure, but continuing would have cost us everything. And we all reach a point where we have to decide whether we're going to keep feeding the myth or tell ourselves the truth. That's why this episode mattered, at least to me. And that's why Jukebox Journey is shifting the way it's shifting. We're not here for polite chains or surface connections anymore. We're here for the real links, the human ones, the uncomfortable ones, the ones that actually explain why the music sounds the way it does and why the people behind it changed the way they did. So if this episode felt heavier, it's intentional. I'm sorry. But if it felt more honest, good, and if it made you laugh, side-eye the screen, because I know some of y'all did, or rethink a story you thought you already knew, then it did its job. And I'm proud of it. Thank you for watching it. We're not done exploring these kinds of journeys, not even close. And moving forward, this show is going to keep leaning into depth, consequence, growth, and yes, a little feral truth when it's earned. Y'all know I'm all feral over here because conformity is boring and honesty lasts so much longer. Thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for letting the structure breathe while I paced myself a little bit smarter, healthier. And thank you for being here for stories that don't need to be sanitized to be meaningful. All right, y'all. I got to go and give my throat breath here. That's Jukebox Journey for tonight, the very first one of 2026, and I'm so proud. We'll pick it back up next Saturday, 8 p.m., same time, same place, with another connection worth following, another story worth sitting with, and another reminder that music history, it makes a lot more. It makes a lot more sense once you stop pretending the people in it were not human. Until then, I'll see y'all Monday for Ask a Bee, 12 noon Central. And let's not forget that we do have a show that will be coming up tomorrow on the Iron Sharpening Iron universe. And I want you all to be there. Please be there. I've left you the link. Okay. Until then, take care of yourselves and don't be afraid to grow louder and wiser at the same damn time. All right? Love you all. Thank you. Thank you to my new sister, Nikita. Love you, honey. Bye-bye, y'all.